Hello, everyone in the real estate community. I am Kayla Andrade coming to you today with another Housing Today with Kayla, and I have a special guest. She's in the back waiting room, not in this room, but you know what I mean. We're on StreamYard, and we're going to be talking about from paralegal versus real estate lawyer. So we're going to really kind of dive deep into what Caitlin has to, what her services are, and what the difference will be between a paralegal versus a lawyer, and when you need that lawyer versus when you need a paralegal. But I just want to be able to jump on and really connect with everyone. So just hit the link there for StreamYard so that we can communicate back and forth a little bit easier on YouTube. So if you guys are over there, just definitely give us some comments and some likes just to kind of let us know how where everyone's watching from, so that we are able to reach out and connect one another when I'm so busy. So I just want to make sure I have the opportunities on Fridays to really connect with the group and bring you some people that I've been talking to, because I talked to a lot of people. So just like not last weekend, but the weekend before, we were at the Canadian Multifamily Conference, which was phenomenal. Great people, lots of networking, and you get excited over the guest speakers, and then you get really excited when you're getting to network with other landlords from different ways of investing, different businesses that are out there, which has obviously given me the passion to continue to host our conferences for the Ontario Landlords Watch conferences here in Cambridge. So we have our fourth one. Everyone's like, hey, we need to do a conference. And I'm like, of course we do. It's an election year. We have to get ourselves doing a conference for this. So that's going to be hosted on October 1st from 1 till 7:30 is going to be the content. And from 7:30 to 9:30, we're going to be doing some networking. So as you can tell through the little logo here, it's going to be a theme. We always do our theme to really make it fun, make it the safe environment for us to talk about the housing issues and to really give some detailed solutions on how our elected officials can address the housing crisis that we do have in Ontario and really across Canada. So we're excited to be launching the registration now tonight. I know some people have found it already, especially from people from Alberta and BC who are going to join us and network with us here in Ontario. So we're excited to be able to meet everybody and make it fun. It's going to be a 3-course meal, probably 4-course meal for everyone that's going to be attending. And we're going to have some games, some prizes, and really be able to network with our experts in real estate so that we can continue to keep growing, because education is the key to running our successful real estate business. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Caitlin Mcintyre. Thank you so much for joining me. I had such a pleasant conversation with her on the phone, and I just we kept talking and talking. Like, I got to get you on to speaking with our members, just because it's always fascinating how we always talk paralegals all the time, but we never talk about our real estate lawyers. So thank you for coming on and speaking with the members.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And, it was lovely connecting with you as well. I do tend to do a little bit of work with residential landlords, but as you kind of implied there, it doesn't necessarily intersect in the same way that paralegals work. It addresses different landlord needs. So a lot of the folks who are listening probably have dealt with a paralegal or represented themselves at the landlord tenant board, and kind of where a full-blown lawyer would step in is on complicated issues or matters that go a bit beyond that. So I know this is a bit of a casual presentation or more of a chat.
We're just chatting. You can just explain exactly where your sectors are, because I got your bio, so no one got your bio. So
no worries.
Educate people on where you cover, because it's always like the craziest of crazy situations that we know we get you in.
Yeah, so I actually do real estate law, as Kayla mentioned, and I also am a civil litigator. So I do tend to get involved either with very complicated landlord-tenant matters, even at the board level, but with things like compliance. So, for example, for those landlords who run year-round land lease communities or mobile home parks, as they're more often known by, but if someone has a permanent residence in your park, that's actually governed under the Residential Tenancies Act. And depending on the size of the park, often different ministries will get involved with respect to compliance. So when you're dealing with that, while a paralegal would be very helpful at the board itself, when it comes to the law dealing with municipalities and dealing with ministries, you might want to consult with a lawyer first, especially when it comes to things like sewer and septic and water testing, which is an area where I have assisted clients in coming into compliance with the Ministry of Environment, for example, or bringing their number of units down, so their water usage would then fall outside of the ministry. So that's one area. Oh, go ahead.
That's where I had a landlord who called me, and it was about the water testing, and it was supposed to be up to the tenants to do the water testing, and refused to pay for the water testing, and it fell back onto the landlords. And now the landlord's trying to go after an eviction, and I'm like, mobile water testing, I'm like, out of my scope. I'm like, I gotta get into it. And that's why it's like it's refreshing to know you got that angle of where to go with this.
And that's actually something that's specifically dealt with within the Residential Tenancies Act. So land lease communities or trailer park communities, if you are dealing with tenants who will not water test themselves, the landlord actually can recover on a per capita basis, so per unit, for water testing costs. And that's right in the Residential Tenancies Act. Now, will the tenants just automatically go with that? No, they will often, protest and refuse to pay, but that is a right that's built into the Residential Tenancies Act, but it is exclusive to mobile home parks and land lease communities. It doesn't pertain to normal residential units or building units. And it's something that a lot of landlords don't necessarily know about. So even a client that I was dealing with had been bearing the cost of that water testing by themselves. Because of course, if you're not testing your water in those kinds of areas, you might run into problems with people like the Ministry of Environment, who might crack down on you with compliance orders. And those can be very expensive to deal with. If you're ever ordered, for example, to do an environmental survey, that can be up to $20,000 just for one. So it's really important to understand that there's different types of residential units, and those different types of units are covered in different areas of the Act. And sometimes it is good to speak with a lawyer about those higher level legal issues, because we tend to have that kind of specialization when it comes with dealing with interpretation of the legislation and dealing with addressing concerns with compliance in particular. So I'm actually glad to hear that that's not a new issue for you, because I really hope that, more landlords in those types of communities, land lease communities, will understand more of their rights, because they're kind of an area where they have much more obligations than normal residential landlords with respect to the land itself. And even if it's not under the Residential Tenancies Act, there are other acts and other ministries that can come in and kind of crack down on the landlord, because the landlord does own the property itself. But that's something that's good to know for anyone who happens to be a landlord in that type of situation, is that the Residential Tenancies Act builds in the ability for you to recoup just for the actual costs you incur. So you have to incur it first, pay it up front, and then you can actually invoice the tenants to have them reimburse you. And it doesn't count as additional rent. It's just a reimbursement of your out-of-pocket expenses.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. We thought there's a whole new different ball game out there, guys. So now you got that part from the mobile leases. What else do you cover?
So other things that I do are appeals. So I'm not sure how many landlords are listening today who's dealt with a particularly stubborn tenant, or as I like to call them, professional tenants. But some of these tenants do have experience in the court, either through landlord-tenant issues or other matters. And so they might try to push what seems like a straightforward eviction through the review process all the way through to the appeal process. Now, paralegals, they can help with the review process, but as soon as that review process is finalized, if the tenant appeals further, it goes up to the Divisional Court of Appeal. Once you get outside of the landlord-tenant board, and once you get outside of small claims court, so into Superior Court or into the Divisional Court or the Court of Appeal, you actually can't use a paralegal. You either need to represent yourself or you need to get a lawyer. And it's kind of a mixed bag, because these places do tend to be a little bit sympathetic to self-reps For example, it's built right into the legislation that tenants are allowed to, in fact, go straight up to the Divisional Court of Appeal without proving their case first. Normally, if you're going to appeal something, you have to show the court that you have grounds for an appeal, whereas tenants are given the automatic right to appeal at least that one step up to the divisional court. And so if you need assistance with dealing with one of those professional tenants who has gone beyond the review process and is still pushing it, I would highly recommend going to a lawyer, because there are very, very specific rules with respect to the divisional court and how things are heard there. And, unfortunately, sometimes tenants will even push it beyond the divisional court and go up to the Court of Appeal. And if that happens, you absolutely should be getting a lawyer involved, because you're dealing with significant costs and significant court fees. And as well, often by the time cases get to the Court of Appeal, you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars in things like rent arrears and damages. So getting a lawyer involved for the divisional court is also important. Another area that I deal in, which was mentioned when we first started.
That's what I was like, I'm trying not to,
real estate.
Shut up. And I'm like,
yeah. So I was like,
because this is why we have to advocate. This is why things need to change at all different type of levels of the court systems. We have like too many duplicates of services, and we have a lot of complications that is making our investors really hesitant on investing into Ontario. Sorry, keep going.
Honestly, if you are investing from outside of Ontario, I would highly, highly suggest you get a lawyer's opinion first to really break down some of the risks, because I have had clients who were from the Maritime provinces who were coming in and investing here in Ontario and ended up with a professional tenant, and they just couldn't understand why they got trapped in this 5, 6, 7 year long litigation cycle. But part of it is because they didn't really understand the rules here when they first invested. And so if you want to spend a couple $100 on a lawyer's opinion, just ask them to give you an overview of what the law looks like here. It's honestly going to be worth it, because it's going to help you safeguard your business going down the line. But this is an area where we do need reform. Not a popular opinion, in that I still rent, my friends still rent, but my firm opinion is the pendulum has swung way too far. Back in the 90s and 80s, it was very anti-tenant, and I feel like they have taken that and they have just completely swung it in the opposite direction. So now we have landlords who are not only losing out on their investments, right, which is not good for our current economy considering, but we also have landlords who, it might be their retirement fund that is this property that they're renting out. Like, that is their retirement and they're losing it. And so I completely agree. We need to see a change. But in the meantime, until there's change, I would highly recommend talking to a lawyer and getting that legal advice on how far this can go if you get the wrong tenant into your property.
Now, Caitlin, are you doing any webinars, something where our landlords can like just sit there with you and just, I know I want to be a part of it, because I know we're missing out on so much education just by speaking with you.
Yeah, so it's something that I've really heavily considered. I actually am very recently out on my own. I started my own practice up last year here in Waterloo. And so it's an area that my assistant has been really pushing me to get further into. But I am hoping, as long as I can stay in touch with you, Kayla, we'll get some of that going on, because I think some of this question and answer stuff is very important for landlords. And I do have some residential landlord clients, but again, when they come to me, it's usually because they either need to safeguard themselves for the future, or unfortunately they've encountered one of those professional tenants who has put them in a very difficult situation. So that's definitely something maybe you and I can talk about after the fact.
I'll tell you after the show.
Yeah, and you can help me connect with some of these listeners today, and we can get some basic information out there, because I really think we need to be encouraging landlords to come into the market. It's part of why we are in a rental crisis right now. Because as I was leading into earlier, I'm also a real estate lawyer, and I have seen a huge push in the last couple of years after COVID for landlords to exit the market. A lot of landlords just packed up and left as soon as they could. And that created a whole bunch of different and rather novel issues, in that now we don't have a lot available on the market rental wise, and we definitely need more, which is something that we need to push lawmakers on, incentivizing landlords to come back into this market. And as well, That's also why it's important to get the right real estate lawyer if you're looking to either buy a tenanted building or sell a tenanted building. And that's another area that I practice in, is real estate law. Everything from mortgages to purchases to sales, and even to more advanced issues like title issues, which happen to do with the ownership of the property. But the biggest problem I see with tenants is tenants who don't move out on time. So I'm sure there are some landlords here who have sold a tenanted building before. If you are selling it with the tenants staying in the building, that's somewhat less of a problem. You just need to be honest and disclose what's going on to the people purchasing with respect to rent arrears, etc. Right? And then you get to move forward from there, and you get your newly tenanted building. But if you're selling a tenanted building and you are selling it to someone who intends to use it for personal use, so they need those tenants out, that can create a huge liability risk if your tenant refuses to move. So that's another area where, using a lawyer, a full-blown lawyer instead of a paralegal, will be important, because if you have a deal that falls through as the result of a tenant refusing to leave, you're not talking small claims court damages. You are looking at superior court, which is anything over $50,000 in damages goes into superior. So there are ways to address that. We've had a couple situations where sellers have paid for the buyers to stay in a hotel for an extra month while they negotiated to get the tenant out, right? And it shouldn't be that way. It really shouldn't. And unfortunately, the reality is right now, paying the tenant to leave in those situations seems to be the most effective way to deal with it. But getting the notice out on time and promptly is very important, but also getting the notice out correctly to the tenants is also important. So some landlords don't realize that in order to evict a tenant because you are selling the property, you first need an agreement of purchase and sale that has been signed. If you do not have it signed when you issue that notice to the tenant, by the time you get to the landlord tenant board, they might throw the whole thing out and make you start all over, because technically you cannot evict someone who is staying in that property for the reason of selling it unless you've got that agreement already signed. So that's something to bear in mind as well, is that you want to make sure you've got your deal set in stone, and then you also want to make sure that you're building in enough time to address the tenant's move out. So one way that some of my clients have preemptively dealt with that, after getting some good legal advice on the front end, is that they've actually given like a buffer room of say 3 months at the end of the actual termination period, in case they need to go to the landlord tenant board to evict. And that's very important, because if you know your tenants well and you know your tenants aren't going to move, then you're not going to be able to get them out without an order from the landlord tenant board, or some less conventional means like literally handing them cash to leave. That is a way that unfortunately has become very common these days. But one of the things I deal with is mitigating damages on the back end. So if a tenant does refuse to leave, how do we settle things out with the buyer? How do we prevent this from becoming a full-fledged legal action? Because technically you could be on the hook for the difference between what the buyer would have been able to get if they were purchasing your home versus what they have to settle for by purchasing a new home. So even if there's a difference in price, that's something you could be liable for if your tenant doesn't move out.
Now, same thing when it comes down to like trying to negotiate cash for keys, and they do into cash for keys, but again, the tenant doesn't leave as well, right? So everyone thinks, oh, it's cash for keys. We got the N11 sign, like everything's all good. Let's firm up. Let's get this deal done, right? And a lot of that comes down to confusion where, guess what? Now the tenant's like, I'm having a hard time trying to find a new place. I'm going to stay a little bit longer, right? And that's where a lot of our landlords going to make sure that, leaving, like you said, leave that buffer room. And if you need to speed up the date, the closing date afterwards, when the tenant is gone, it's one thing, but really opening the communication with your tenants and giving them that heads up that you're going to be selling before you even sell. So that way it's not a shock to them, and it's not so shocking to them where they go, well, I'm going to fight it because I don't feel that you're going to be moving into it or the new owner is going to be moving into it. Now, do you represent the landlords as well? Let's say that they said that they were going to move into it, but then they didn't, or they sold it instead, is that something where is in your scope, or is it still more of the paralegal side of
So
things?
that is a little bit more of the paralegal side of things. And part of the reason for that, because I'm going to be very honest, is that paralegals tend to specialize in their areas very extremely. So they will be at the board for multiple issues in a day. And that's very important because, as anyone who's been to the board knows, they don't necessarily hear your matter on the first go. So if you're paying for me to sit in, now it's a little different now that everything's remote, because I can do a little bit of work behind the camera, but it used to be that you'd hike down to the landlord tenant board, you'd sit in that cramped little room, and my clients would have to pay me to be there for the whole day. And that's just really, honestly, it's not really worth people's money, and it's not really worth the investment unless it's something complicated you're dealing with, where you really want to rely on a lawyer's legal knowledge, like, for example, dealing with compliance and the ministry, or more complicated rental issues like water testing. You probably do still want to stick with a paralegal. If things move to the point where the tenant is coming after you after the fact and it's in small claims, that might be something where you could get a lawyer involved. But I would still say the paralegal's probably your better bang for your buck. And I work with a number of paralegals that I very much trust, and I will often pick and choose what particular matters I deal with my landlords, and otherwise pass them off to paralegals, because my goal is not to make the landlord lose any money than they're already likely going to lose dealing with a problematic tenant.
No, I think you got to be the most honest lawyer I know.
It's maybe a character flaw, but
You are. You got to like, it's when you know your worth, right? You know your worth, and you know when it's needed, and you know the network and the scope of when to direct them to someone else in order to make sure, because they have, obviously it's going to be costly as it is.
yeah.
That is awesome. Okay, it's scary too at the same time. I don't want to be scaring anybody here.
Yeah, and you know what? It is scary, but there are also really good tenants out there. And there are amazing tenants who will be like lifelong tenants for you, or will pay their rent on time, and who often move out. Like, when I was dealing with that compliance issue I talked about previously, we had to remove 6 units. Only 2 of the units refused to move. The other 4, they took their notice and they moved out. Didn't take any more elbow grease or fighting. They were just genuinely good tenants, right? And so I wouldn't be afraid. If you get a good tenant, it is such a good investment to be a residential landlord. What I would be, instead of afraid, is cautious, right? You want to make sure that you are getting all of your ducks in a row when it comes to things like credit checking and reference checking, and also being aware of things like, for example, false references. That's actually a crime. Like that is a criminal offense. A lot of people don't realize that, but you can't commit that kind of fraud, right? By giving a false reference, you are committing a type of fraud. So that's something to keep in mind, is that's not lawful either. I know that's something that happens a lot these days, is that people will give false references in hopes of sneaking in, but just checking those references carefully and taking the time to go through that process is very important. And often, if you know someone who knows the tenant and you trust that person, that can also be very helpful, because really it's the small minority who are the problem tenants. They just are a huge problem, those tenants, right? And
it puts a bad taste in the landlord's mouth, and they don't want to go into getting into other investments. They're also struggling at the concept of buying properties at a very high cost, and now they have to recoup it with the rent. And if they don't get it, that money's coming out of their pockets. And some people, when they dabble into real estate, it's either that townhouse or the single family home or the condo, right?
yeah.
And that's usually what it gets them into some heat. Now, how does this condo thing work? I know for me, I was never a condo investor, never even bothered to look. I'm like looking at the condo fees always increasing, and knowing that the rent is at 1.2%, it's a little bit,
yeah.
want to work with that.
Yeah. So with respect to condos, there's a couple things that you have to address with condos. So condo fees are going to go up like X amount per year for the most part, right? So for those who don't know, I'll give a basic overview of what condos kind of are. So a condo is essentially like a group investment in a giant building or series of units where you own a portion of that building or a series of units together with everyone else who owns it. So the condo board itself represents the condo corporation, but the condo board is made up of other owners. So it's not its own entity like a builder would be. So these owners, they're all responsible for their share of the expenses. And that includes capital improvements or even special expenses that might come up from things like slip and falls. That's a big one that people don't think about too much. But if there's a slip and fall somewhere on the condo property and it's a common area, everybody could end up having to chip in to pay that. So there's a couple things you can do to safeguard yourself against those special assessments. And one of them is actually by making sure you get the right kind of condo insurance. So when you're shopping around for insurance, you can ask for specific coverage that would address special assessments, because on average, the increase in condo fees is 2 to 4% per year, right? And that is not of the full condo fee. That is just of the portion that is going towards what's called the reserve fund. Okay. And the reserve fund is like your self-insurance. It's your piggy bank that you keep to the side in case the shingles start going flying off the roof, so that together you can pay and repair that building. Now, 2 to 4%, that's still a pretty scary amount, but it's not the whole condo fee that's increasing, right? It's the portion, which is, say it's a $300 condo fee, maybe $100 of that is going to the reserve fund. And it's that portion that increases every single year. The big scary increases that happen sometimes, you can actually get insurance to protect against that. That's the special assessment insurance. It's not necessarily always included in every condo insurance package, but it's something that I always recommend, because if you have that insurance and something happens like a slip and fall and the corporation gets sued, or there is a massive storm and a tree comes down on the roof and suddenly you see like 100% increase, because that does happen sometimes, right?
Oh,
But
it probably just happened this weekend.
Exactly. But it's going to happen for a set period of time. And as well, that is called a special assessment. So if you have insurance to cover for that, your insurance company will actually step in and help you mitigate that loss. So doesn't necessarily need to be fully recovered from the tenant right away if you can go ahead and address that with insurance. That's kind of a little bit of a safety net there. And because it's only part of the condo fee that increases every year, right? The fact that we're capped on our rent increases isn't quite as scary as you think. One of the areas that I do see a lot of litigation in when it comes to tenants is the condo rules. So a lot of people don't realize that condo rules, they have no restrictions. At the landlord tenant level, you can't ban someone from having a pet, right? That's against the rules. You're not allowed to do it except for a certain amount of circumstances, right? However, if it's a condo, the condo can have a strict no pets rule, and the condo is allowed to enforce that. So you might end up in a situation where your tenant is fighting you on the condo's rules. Your tenant will also have to sign on to those rules, but what happens if they just refuse to deal with it, right? You can, in fact, do an emergency application at the board. I have seen this done before, which tends to happen a little faster. It's not that much faster because, unfortunately, the board is yeah, the board is struggling, but that is grounds to bring an urgent application at the board, because you yourself as the owner, you're responsible for their breaches of the rules. So you could end up, having fees charged against you by the condo board, and you'll be paying the condo board's legal fees for sending you letters and demand letters and things like that. So you can turn around and go to the board if your tenant refuses to comply and try to get them evicted on those grounds. But what's important is kind of figuring out the type of person your tenant is, because only certain types of people should really be in these condos in the first place. People who aren't, in a rock band. I have a cousin who's a drummer. You should never be in a condo because the rules are far too strict. Another thing that people don't think about with condos is that they're often new builds. So I don't know how many people listening have ever bought a new build before, but in Ontario, we build the HST to a certain degree into the purchase price for a new build, right? That charge is built in there because when you are moving in personally, you automatically can get this rebate. You don't have to pay first and then get a rebate. You can get it's like 25 or something $1,000 rebate from this program that's run by the government for moving in as your primary residence, for being the first person to move in. If you plan to buy it as an investment property, however, and if you're not planning to move it in as your primary residence for the first year, you do have to pay that HST up front. It is not included in your purchase price for that condo, for that new build. You will have to pay that forward to the builder so the builder can remit it, and then you apply and you get the rebate back from the government. And that's something a lot of people do not think about when they purchase condos. So I often have clients who will move into the condos themselves for a period of time and use it, like designate it for a year as their primary residence so that they can just get that rebate up front and they don't have to come up with that extra 20 something $1,000 to cover the HST until a rebate comes in. So it's not that you won't get a rebate, you will get one, but you will only get one after the fact, and only if you can show that you have a tenant who signed that lease and the lease is for at least a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm now even scared of condos even more.
Well, you know what? Condos are a necessity in this day and age. They absolutely are, but it is something that people do not know enough about, which is maybe another area you and I can talk about doing a webinar or something. But it's very important to make sure you're reading the condo rules, right? And that you're generally educating yourself. If you are getting a condo, even if you are going in without any conditions on an agreement of purchase and sale, hire a lawyer right away to review the status certificate, review the rules, and review the bylaws so you know what you're getting into. And if it's a brand new build, absolutely, you need to be getting a lawyer for yourself to go over that agreement with you when you're signing, because a lot of people don't understand what they're signing up for, including things like the HST rebate. Every builder's agreement basically says that you're moving in as a personal residence, right? Because that's the presumption. And if you're not, that changes things when it comes to closing.
Wow. So, and do you step in, like, let's say that you get this build thing that's happening and this is the set price that you buy it for, but then inflation happens, the cost is going up, and now the cost has gone up on your new builds, and then the landlord wants, or the new owner wants to back out of it. Like, how does that work? That's coming out a lot now. I'm like, who's in trouble?
Yeah, so that's actually a very tough, and I don't want to scare people away from new builds. But unfortunately, the way that we've structured things in Ontario is very, well, fortunately and unfortunately. Unfortunately for buyers, fortunately for builders. We do want people to build. We do want that infrastructure. We want that there. But for individual owners who are buying these houses or these condos, a lot of the rules are very much structured to support the builder. So even your ability to recover against the builder for damage that's done during the building process, that's all through what's called the Ontario Home Warranty. And you have to go through Tarion, that Ontario Home Warranty, first before you can ever try to recover from the builder. So technically, the builder is able to increase that price and put you on the hook. And if you can't match what they're asking for, they can keep your deposit. That's the current structure of how things go. And it's very unfortunate. And I really wish that more people these days were being told by builders, like, yeah, you absolutely need to review this with a lawyer first. Because even if you try to back out for a different reason, right? Like, you know, you've realized that this isn't the place you're going to be staying. You get a new job, you're ending up having to move somewhere else, because these new builds can take years and years and years to be finished. And say you end up buying in Cambridge, Ontario, and you have to move to Ottawa, Ontario. Well, if you try to back out, they could very well just keep your whole deposit. And my best advice to you would be to negotiate directly with the builder on that, is to see if there's a way that you can come up with a happy medium where you're not trying to go after them to get your deposit back, but you're probably also going to have to give something up in order to get out of that contract. For example, Some people I know, they assign the contract to someone else. They find another buyer who is interested, who wants it at the new price, and they pass it on to them instead. And it's kind of the most inexpensive and painless way to address that kind of situation where suddenly the price has been hiked or your circumstances have been changed, because builders do have a fair amount of power in that way.
Wow, man, I could just listen to you all night. Okay, I have a question though. It's a little kind of still part of housing.
Yeah.
Title insurance.
Title insurance.
I found out about, like, I know we pay it, and then I had to do some digging with it, and that's how we start connecting a little bit. But I just want people to kind of know about title insurance.
Yeah, so title insurance is something that came into play like after the 90s. So when I was quite young, and it is essentially your insurance to protect your ownership rights. So it doesn't protect the physical building. If there was a fire that took out my grandmother's beautiful, oh, it's over here, beautiful, china cabinet that she left me, that isn't covered under title insurance. That's something I'd have to go to my homeowner's insurance for, right? Or my renter's insurance for. Yeah. Title insurance protects your ownership rights, and it protects it from a number of things. For example, if you buy a new house and you find out that there were no permits for an addition that was built on the backyard, well, the city might come in and say, you're going to tear that entire thing down, or you're going to pay X amount to bring things into compliance. If you have title insurance and there are no exemptions, so sometimes the title insurer will say, I'm not going to cover you for blank, right? As long as you've got an endorsement, which covers everything, the title insurer will actually step in and will help you address the issues with the city and will help you pay to get things into compliance, because you did not, in fact, do that thing. You didn't build that without the permit. You just own the property. And things like permits, they actually flow with the property. They don't attach to the owner. Same thing goes for like water bills and tax bills. So if you have a real estate lawyer who doesn't do their job correctly and doesn't make sure that the property taxes have been paid in full, and all of a sudden you see you're being slapped with a couple grand worth of tax arrears, that's part of why you have title insurance, because they will step in and they will help cover you for that. They also protect your mortgage. The biggest thing that they protect you from realistically is mortgage fraud. So if someone comes in and takes out a fraudulent mortgage on the property, or maxes out a line of credit on the property by impersonating you, title insurance will actually protect you from that. They will step in and they will help cover that cost. And that's part of the reason why title insurance became a thing here in Ontario, is that there was a series of what we would call rogues who would come in and they would refinance homes, a lot of the time of elderly people, without, being honest with them or by being completely fraudulent with them. And then these elderly people would be out like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it used to be that you couldn't figure out who to recover from. Do you recover from the person? Do you recover from the bank? Like, what do you do? Now the insurance company steps in this day and age, and they actually will protect you in exchange for you paying like a couple $1,000 premium usually, right? Because there is still a premium, but it will protect you from having to pay like $100,000, right?
I always wanted to know what that was all about. We pay it, but we just never know when to come on.
So like, depending on the type of building you're buying, the premiums range. The premiums can be quite expensive these days because buildings are quite expensive, but it preserves the original purchase price, that value, it preserves that going forward. So when I have clients who buy like, $1.5 million, $2 million house, which unfortunately is getting closer to the average these days, they're going to pay like $1,000, $1,500 in straight up title insurance. However, they're then protected. So the value of that house is protected at that $2 million from any issues with things like permits, with things that the previous owner might have done that don't attach to the person, they attach to the land itself. So it's very important to get. It can cover you for certain rental issues, right? And it can cover you as well for various concerns with boundaries. So if your neighbor's fence is on your part of the property, or if your neighbor moves your fence, right? Title insurance can step in. They can also step in if you get sued. So if you end up, getting sued by a previous owner, or sorry, by a future owner, or if you end up in a situation where you need to pursue the previous owner. Oh, there's a question on the screen. Oh, so yes, so title insurance, that's a very good question. So you actually get title insurance for as long as you are on that house, right?
Woo.
So if I buy title insurance today, I am protected until I go ahead and sell the house. Now, for your mortgage company, that's different. So when you first buy your house, you're going to get a mortgage. And that mortgage is going to need their own policy. That's purchased by your lawyer as well. It's usually the exact same as your company that you use for your personal title insurance. The mortgage is only going to be covered for as long as that mortgage is valid. Once your mortgage is renewed, you need to buy a new lender's policy, which is just protecting the lender. Your original owner's policy will stay valid as long as you are on title for that house. So even if you end up moving one person off title from that house, right, you're still covered. You don't need new title insurance. Yeah, every
I'm trying to get to the questions too at the same time, because I'm just like in love with listening.
No, I can see it. So if you have to remortgage every time you need a new policy, that is correct, right? Every time you remortgage, there will be a new policy. Lenders' policies are less expensive than homeowners' policies because they only cover what the lender's interest is or what they're looking to protect. And so it's not as bad as it seems. It is a little frustrating because you're going to spend that couple $100 every time you refinance, but it's worth it because it will protect your lender. If it's a new lender, if it's a private lender, like you're going to have protection for them so that they don't have to turn around and come after you for any reason. They can recover through the actual insurer itself. And again, this isn't for things like you not paying your mortgage. This is for things like delinquent water arrears or tax arrears or boundary issues with your neighbor, which can affect, especially in this day and age, the market value of your house, right? The point behind title insurance is to make sure you have good and marketable ownership so that you can go ahead and you can sell that property. You can retain the value and improve on the value, and you're not going to have any losses as a result of something that someone else did.
Wow. Man, I should have got you on like years ago talking to us. And I just want to make sure we do a shout out for Derek here when he talked about it's a perfect tip. It's especially for our real estate friends. It's never put that in there. It's always it gives you the ooey gooey feeling, but protect yourself and your investments and making sure that you're not guaranteeing it.
And that's really solid advice, because if you do guarantee it and then you don't provide it, you breach that contract. That's you. And technically you have until the very day of closing, or if there are extensions, you have until the end of that extension to remedy it. But if you can't get the tenant out, you are on the hook 100% because you promised them vacant possession, right? So if you can avoid that at all costs, make it the new owner's problem. That's something I've seen where people will purchase and then it's up to the new owner to get that tenant out before they can move in. And that's something I've seen that sellers have done to protect themselves. So that's great advice.
And you're seeing a lot of our you're seeing a lot of landlords starting to get out of the market, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is really, to me, it's really sad. My parents used to be landlords back in the day, and in Waterloo region, we had a massive bylaw change here in Waterloo, which rendered their previously completely legal buildings that were completely in compliance. It just rendered them no longer profitable because you could only rent them out X amount of bedrooms per floor for a building that was under 4 floors. So even though my parents were genuinely the best landlords in the world, we got phone calls for years after they stopped being landlords from tenants who were just like, we miss you. They had to get out. And that was about 10 years ago now. And the market's just getting worse for landlords right now with this whole COVID rent freeze and the rental eviction freeze. That was, not to get too political, but that was, in my honest opinion, it was a mistake. Because I think it has really, really discouraged landlords, and we're seeing a shortage of rental units, right? And that's such a shame.
I was going to ask it, but Connie's on there asking it for me, I think. So it's
Yeah. Okay. So what's a change that I would like to see to incentivize new landlords? So I actually would love to see things like, an opposite of a rental evictions freeze. So I would like to see some major reform in the Residential Tenancies Act to make it easier for a landlord to get in front of the landlord tenant board, especially for issues such as non-payment of rent. Non-payment of rent is one of the hardest ways to get a tenant out, and that is ridiculous. And that needs to
there's government money to help people in rent arrears as well, right?
That would be another one. And things like, there was that program where the government was willing to match X amount for like commercial rentals and things like that. But even then they were saying, oh, okay, commercial landlords, drop it down to 70%. I don't like that. I think we need to be offering, more financial support for landlords, and as well, just better access for landlords to the Residential Tenancies Act, right? And to the board itself, because as it stands right now, the board is very heavily tenanted, right? It's tenant favored rather. And I think that needs to change. I think it needs to be a little bit more straightforward for landlords to actually get in front of the board and get something back. And I would also like to see easier enforcement measures. So I'm sure everyone knows right now, if you get a money order from the landlord tenant board, you can't enforce that. You can't enforce it. You have to go and register it with the small claims court before you're allowed to take enforcement action. That needs to stop. We need to make it easier for landlords to recover after they've gone through this process, because honestly, otherwise, what is the financial incentive? So I think if we can get more government support, and instead of having things like CERB, have it go directly towards things like rent, directly towards landlords. Because
they just put $19 million into the Landlord and Tenant Board and the Ontario Land Tribunal to deal with non-payment of rent. So we go in wouldn't that cover, that money would cover a lot of people to stay in their homes, So this is the concept where we're really trying to advocate that there's got to be a more simple way to deal with non-payment of rent. We shouldn't have to have it in front of an adjudicator. You either paid it or you didn't, and here's some services if you didn't. And again, on the N12s, you have a signed an affidavit, you have a firm agreement. Like, why are we still allowing tenants to dispute that the landlords are wanting to move in or the new owners are wanting to move in when we know there is hefty fines for trying to do it unlawfully? So we really want to try to incorporate, this is exactly what this conference is going to be about in October, because we have the Landlord and Tenant Board. We're going to narrow, we have 20 issues, but we're bringing it down to 5.
Oh, that's a challenge.
And yeah, I know, right? And then we're going to bring a solution to it, like detailed solutions, how it would be implemented, how it's going to work for the landlord, how it's going to work for the tenant and the taxpayers. And again, with the Residential and Tenancy Act, the top five issues, the top 5 solutions. Then we get in ourselves into municipal. We have that landlord licensing, like you mentioned. We have the water billing. We have short-term rentals. We have all of these vacancy tax that they're trying to do. So we really want to highlight, what those 5 issues, what it's going to do to the market, and what can we propose to make it better to solve the problems that they're trying to solve by introducing these type of restrictions. And then we're going to talk about government housing. Government housing in itself, they think that they everything's shiny in your ball court, no, government housing has some issues. And we also have government programs that are out there either to help initiate, investors to get into the industry or to help tenants. So we're really going to highlight this and that's why we're inviting our elected officials. It's about where it's going to be a safe, fun atmosphere. No one's going to jump on them. We're just having a nice, healthy discussion over dinner and prizes and games, and everyone gets a prize. I'm going to prizes, but I'm not going to be Ellen DeGeneres, guys. but I bring everyone together.
I completely agree. I think honestly, the financial incentives aren't there for landlords right now, and that is something where we spend so much money on the administration, on I'm trying not to get too political, but on the bureaucracy.
It's okay.
So we spend way too much money on the bureaucracy itself. Right? We are sinking money into things like the Landlord Tenant Board when we really should be subsidizing rent directly to landlords, because that's the only way to incentivize landlords to stay in this market, right? Is we need to make sure that they can actually make decent money off of it, especially because, most 99% of the landlords out there aren't that slumlord landlord that people are afraid of. No one listening today is a slumlord landlord, which is what a lot of these changes that have really ended up penalizing landlords are trying to stop. They're trying to stop people from renting out a house where they have 12 people in like closets that they're calling rooms, right? That's not the type of people that we're seeing here or that are trying to advocate for landlord rights. And I genuinely think we need to see more financial support for these people. And we need to see an easier process. If we could take rental arrears out of the landlord tenant board and leave that for other issues, for serious issues, we would first of all be able to actually address the issues of slumlords, because tenants would be able to bring those genuine issues to the board. We would also be preventing these professional tenants from literally living off of someone. Like the case that I saw that went to the Court of Appeal, I believe by the time it hit the Court of Appeal, this gentleman was $25,000 in rent arrears. And it's one guy, right? It's not a whole ton of people who have done this, but this guy knew what he was doing. He'd been in court before, and he just pushed it as far as he could go with very little argument, and ended up costing the landlord way more than the landlord would ever be able to recover after him, right? Because we know, people aren't tenants because they have hard assets themselves that you can recover from, right? People are tenants because they don't have something like a house that is.
That's where the politicians are going with this home ownership. And it's like, not everyone is going to be a homeowner. They don't have the job for it. They don't have the credit. They don't got the down payment of that 5%. Like, you have to understand that we have a market of renters, and you need to make sure that we have supply for them. But we're now in a deficit of well over 200,000 units but they're bringing in, 70,000 people right now, just in an emergency situation. I'm like, where are they all going? We have to talk about what are we able to fulfill and to, because if not, it's broke our system. That's what it has.
We also need to incentivize developers to develop more reasonable housing, because, here in the Waterloo region, there's a couple of areas that are being developed right now. And instead of developing townhouses or condos or apartments or just any kind of multi-unit housing, they're putting up these giant mega mansions that are absolutely unnecessary for this kind of area. We have those here already. Yep. They're here already. We need more multi-unit housing or reasonably sized houses. And so I understand from a development standpoint, developers aren't going to stop building those big houses unless they get some sort of incentive from the government. So I really think it's two-tone. The government should be working with landlords, and the government also should be working with developers, because only then are we going to be able to come up with a solution together that doesn't tank our economy and doesn't prevent people from earning. Because the reality is, you cannot have housing in the hands of private people and expect them not to earn money off of it, because they are investing their money, their time, and their effort in order to be landlords in the first place. So what other incentive would they have? This is not a charity. And if we're going to make it a charity, then the government needs to step up.
This place, StreamYard needs to have the button that, like on Zoom, where you can clap, or the heart. I'd be clicking this right now. So everyone, if you're watching, please give some thumbs up for Caitlin and her opinion on things, because it's refreshing. And it's not like I've been saying it for so long. It's really refreshing to hear other people saying it as well, because and we talk to developers, and the developers are going to be invited to the conference as well, because they look at how it takes 2 to 3 years just before they get the shovels in the ground. And so their expenses are gone up, and they talk about the only way for them to make money now is in those luxury homes. And now our government is thinking, oh, let's go tiny homes. And if you look at like these modules, this little footprint that they have of a little tiny home now, it's like little tiny homes. Like, you want to look for a lot, like you got to build up. Like, we want to get people off the streets. And sadly, in Kitchener, we have a community outside of the train station now. Like, it's tents everywhere. Like, this is in Canada. We have to do better for people to put them in their homes, because in reality, taxpayers are paying for this as well, right? So this is why we're always trying to look for the better solutions for the good landlords, the good tenants, and the taxpayers. Kaylin, I can't thank you enough. Like, I got to have you on again. We're going to do a webinar, girl. because I think the amount of people, legal people I know now, like I want to put you guys all in a little bubble and make sure that we get you out to our
get a panel going.
I'm going to put Caitlin's link here in the chat, guys, so that you can find her website and contact her. Her number is also in the description as well. So if you want to reach out to her, if you got a sale that's happening, if you got a divisional court case happening, if you're in the land, she's got yourself covered there. And I'll also be able to make sure that I finally announce it, because I did not announce it yet that the registration was now live. And we already have people buying tickets. So I just want to make sure they just like, well, it's too late, I didn't get my ticket. I'm like, sorry. We want to really make sure that everyone is here. It's a movement. We're bringing the community together. It's if landlords and real estate got married, we're having the reception, guys. That's it's going to be fun. You're going to be able to see exactly what we're looking at trying to do is bringing the community together with our elected officials, because if they're not inviting us, let's invite them. And we've already had like our MP, our MPP. We also had our regional staff that was with the at the last conference when I was 9 months pregnant. So if you're going back into the event page, you'll see me all 9 months pregnant, hosting these events. So that's how dedicated I am. But I'm excited to see everyone. I think it's about building our community. We're always very small landlords. We're scattered, we're not very formalized. You either have landlords associations or you have big associations that deal with bigger landlords. We have to be that small landlords and really help each other thrive and help each other navigate, and knowing of different products and different services. That's why I'm a full believer in our landlords being able to report their tenants' monthly payment history to Front Lobby, so that it's shared with Landlord Credit Bureau. It's also shared with Equifax. And this way you're going to help out your good tenants at the same time. And now you're going to be able to help you and inform other landlords if you do have a tenant who is leaving you with a debt. We have to show that they're not going to get away with it anymore, that you have to be held accountable. So, Caitlin, I can't thank you enough. Wow, you just blew me away. This was like
Thank you for having me. I love to talk.
So we'll make sure that we'll get Caitlin back on again, because I know she has so much more to say. I'm going to be calling her after this, because you just got my brain thinking right now, just by what you're just able to get, because this is another level that we haven't really dived deep in. And I think what you've been able to explain to us is also needing to be heard by our elected officials as well. So I want to thank you again. And everyone, please give this video a like, a share, so that we can show our love to Caitlin for coming on to helping us out today.
Well, thank
Any
you
last words?
Well, the only thing I would say is, even if you have a matter that you don't think I would be able to help with, I know some very good paralegals that could help with matters that are straight up at the board. So please do feel free to reach out, because we would be happy to refer you to whoever's like the best suited legal service for your needs.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Ontario Landlords Watch. And I hope to see everyone at the conference, and the link is in the comments there, so you guys can start registering. And I'm looking forward to giving you guys a great day networking and advocating and really bringing fun back into real estate. Thank you everyone for watching.